From here to the stars, I am your host, Stephen Euin Cobb. Our guest today is Les Johnson, a physicist, an author of both science fact and science fiction, and a NASA technologist with many research papers published in peer-reviewed journals. Let's see. Les, I've known you for over a decade. And I've long admired your work in space research and, of course, at NASA as well. And also your books. And consequently, you seem to me to be in a unique position to ask for an assessment of which propulsion seems most likely, at least in your own opinion, to be used for our first interstellar mission. So what is your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess part of that, Steve, is how you define interstellar. If you're talking about a mission to another star, true interstellar voyage, and you're talking about robotic spacecraft, then I would firmly come down on the side of some kind of beamed energy system, because the task of carrying all that fuel on board is really, really challenging. Not impossible. Mm-hmm. There are different propulsion options that would allow you to do that, but I think it would be a lot more complicated beyond the complications we have already to develop those. So I would say some kind of beamed energy, whether that be a laser sail, which seems to be pretty popular these days. It could also be a variation of that, something called a microwave sail that Bob Forward came up with, called Star Wisp, or its derivative. So those would be the ones I think would be the nearest term for a robotic spacecraft. When you get farther term and you start talking about ships that could carry people, that's where laser sailing just doesn't quite give you the total thrust, the total force you need to be able to take something big enough to carry lots of people to another star. And you have to enter into another regime and start looking at things like fusion and antimatter. And in that regime, I pretty much come down on the toughest one, which would be antimatter, because I think it's going to be really challenging for a fusion system to really get the speeds we need to have true interstellar travel with people in the time frames. So it's kind of nuanced between the robotic and the human.
Okay. Now, the things that you've described just now, there's a lot of engineering hurdles, but what seems to be, stand out in your mind as the toughest engineering hurdles to be overcome to achieve that?
Well, for the robotic mission and for the human mission, I'll start out, it's pretty simple, really. All of them.
Okay.
Just think about what you have to do. You have to develop a spacecraft that can potentially be going some significant fraction of the speed of light, something on the order of maybe 10% or better, or even a few percent, which would be faster than anything we've flown so far. Mm-hmm. And at those speeds, if you hit any kind of dust grain or micrometeorite, it's going to be like a bomb going off. So it has to survive that. It has to survive the accelerations to get it up to that speed. Whatever the spacecraft is has to get across those distances, be able to do its mission, take pictures, get data, whatever, and send the data back, which is going to be challenging. Mm-hmm. And then you get to the propulsion side, which is really where my expertise lies. And for the laser and beamed energy sails, it's the scale you're talking about. Mm-hmm. You have to have lasers or microwave beamers that basically confiscate the U.S. power grid for the duration of their operation. Mm-hmm. And you have to have some kind of sail or material for that energy to reflect from that doesn't absorb any of it. And that material today, I'm not sure it exists. And there needs to be a lot of fundamental research into making that material, or the combination of materials to make it possible. So when you look at the challenge of really going to the stars, physics says, oh, okay, you can do a beamed energy system. The math all works out right. It looks great. But then, I take off my physicist hat and I put on my applied engineering hat, which I often wear. And I think, wow, the physics says we can do this, but I'm really stuck on how you actually start building it. Mm-hmm. Not that it's impossible, because it isn't. Nature says we can do it. We just need to do a lot more research in a lot of areas before we get there.
Okay.
And I think progress is being made.
Okay.
If you had asked me the same question, which people did back early in my NASA career and when I first started as a working physicist, we didn't have solid state lasers of hundreds of kilowatts or thousands of kilowatts that we have today. That's a huge advancement. Graphene had not been discovered yet, and graphene is a material that I think is a really good candidate for the substrate for surviving all the challenges of the sail. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of things in there, but that we've made progress on, but it's we're not there yet. We need to do a lot more.
Speaking of making progress, if you were to look back, say 20 years ago versus right now, right today, how many people, how much had increase of the number of researchers that are actually looking at overcoming these hurdles? What's the transition? Because, I mean, 20 years ago, nobody practically was working on that, seems like to me.
Well, no, actually, it varies.
Okay.
Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, then NASA Administrator Dan Golden issued a challenge to NASA, and that was to mount an interstellar voyage. And there was a flurry of activity that was centered around, from a mission side at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and from the propulsion side, the Marshall Space Flight Center and the Glenn Research Center, and a lot of universities. That's how Bob Forward, who was a consultant by that time, got involved. And there was a lot of interest in doing it. And there was actually some funding put toward it. For a short while, NASA actually had an interstellar propulsion technology research project that funded some research into these technologies. That lasted about 2 years, and some progress was done. There was the Breakthrough Propulsion Physics program that Mark Millis, who is still active in the field, ran about 20 years ago, that was looking at cutting-edge physics, sometimes beyond cutting-edge physics. It was really good fundamental research kind of stuff. But then everything went into a lull for about 20 years. So it's very cyclical. That peak of interest and enthusiasm and actually some funding, it just collapsed. And it came back, 4 years ago, with the advent of Dr. Phil Lubin's groundbreaking NASA Innovative Advanced Concept study about using lasers to send a very small chipset to another star. And then you had the whole Breakthrough Starshot effort begin. And the 100-year Starship kind of predated all of that, with DARPA doing some seed money for work on interstellar travel. So it goes in cycles. And right now, I think we are at a peak, a bigger peak than we had 20 years ago, in large part due to Breakthrough Starshot. But it's a peak, and there's interest in Congress. There's been interest in private investors. So it's cyclical.
Okay. You mentioned that it peaked for maybe about 2 years, and I'm wondering if it kind of peaked only for 2 years simply because that's how long it took everybody to realize just how big a problem this is. It's a big problem. I mean,
no, I think it was driven more by budget pressures.
Okay.
Than the challenges were told. I don't know of very many people in the space industry who don't ultimately have this desire to see us go to the stars, and they would take their time to do that research and come up with incremental steps to get us closer, which is important, if somebody were willing to fund their work.
Oh, okay.
But you've got to have the funding source, and whether that be the government, or whether that be private not venture capital, because there's not necessarily money return immediately, and just people, wanting to put money up philanthropically to do it, which is kind of what's happening privately now. There has to be some kind of funding source, because if you're you can be the smartest researcher in the world at a university, but you still have to pay the light bill and pay for your grad students, right? So it takes money.
Yeah.
And what you've got to do is convince those that have the purse strings that this is a worthwhile long-term investment.
Okay. That was Les Johnson. This has been From Here to the Stars, a video series created by the Tennessee Valley Interstellar Workshop. The TVIW is a non-profit organization dedicated to thoroughly exploring the science and engineering that can eventually open up the reality of interstellar travel. I have been your host, Stephen Euin Cobb. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and you can subscribe to our channel for other such videos. On behalf of all of us here at the Tennessee Valley Interstellar Workshop, I thank you.